It is my honor to introduce Dr. Freeman Hrabowski, president of UMBC. As a 12-year-old in the 1960s in Alabama, he was jailed in the struggle for human rights. During his 20 years at the helm of UMBC, Dr. Hrabowski has strived to channel their students toward graduate school. It's worked. Last year, UMBC was featured on CBS 60 Minutes as one of America's leading sources of African American PhDs in science and engineering. Dr. Hrabowski and his then girlfriend, now wife, recall a poignant experience from their youth. Studying at the American University in Cairo, they recall strolling for hours in the streets and seeing many people who looked familiar, but they weren't. Later, they realized that differences in language, food, and customs paled in comparison to what they all had in common: family and friends, worrying about the future, and searching for a purpose. Dr. Hrabowski and his future wife returned to America with a deeper understanding of diversity and the shared fate of humanity. Dr. Hrabowski.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I am deeply honored and amazingly delighted to accept this award on behalf of my colleagues and my students. It is such a special evening, and many of them are here. My students are here, so I want my students and my colleagues to stand very quickly. Take a part of my 2 minutes, wherever you are. You're with UMBC students and colleagues. I'm very proud of them. Very proud. Very proud. Yesterday, one of my Haitian graduate students wrote to me this exciting letter about his research project in Tanzania. He is working on developing software that will digitize paper forms using cell phone cameras and helping to employ people there in the country. And what was so clear was that he knew he was making a difference. Several weeks ago, several engineering faculty and students came to talk with my campus leaders about their work to construct a sanitation system for an orphanage in rural Kenya. And again, we saw these students so amazed by the possibility of what their expertise could do. And so whether talking about preparing students to become leaders in emergency health services in different countries, or conducting research on nuclear disarmament, or preparing Sherman scholars in math and science in this country to learn how to help more people become involved in those areas, what we can tell you is this: that whether it's about policy or about science and engineering, we want to get connected. You know, Samuel Beckett is one of our is a muse on our campus, the Irish novelist, the playwright who often wrote in French. And he wrote a book entitled Malloy, in which the characters are studying the dancing of bees. And when bees are dancing, they're actually communicating with each other. And he said this about that phenomenon. He said, here is something I could study all my life: the dancing of bees, the communication, and never really understand. And the significance was that he realized the more he studied it, the more he began to understand. And the more he began to understand, the more he realized there was so much more to know. We in our country, we in the world, need educators and citizens who understand the need to interact with people from all over the world, and to appreciate the fact that the more we are connected, my students from 150 countries, it is amazing. The more we get to know each other, the more we realize there's so much more to know. Every time I look into the face of one of my students from another country, I remember a moment of kindness from a stranger when I was overseas. I remember people having the willingness to look at me, not simply because of the outward appearance, but to get to know me as a person. Eleanor Roosevelt said something that's very special. You see, if you talk about in our country having people from all over the world, the real question is not whether they're just in that space, but do they begin to get connected? And it was she who said, we make our own history. The course of history is directed by the choices we make. And our choices grow out of the ideas, the beliefs, the values, the dreams of the people. I would simply add that the future of humankind will always depend on our choices and our willingness to open our minds, our eyes, our hearts. Thank you all very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to join you all in congratulating tonight's distinguished honorees. Cisco Systems Incorporated is a worldwide leader in the manufacture, design, and sale of networking equipment. And as we just saw in the energetic video a moment ago featuring the Cisco Networking Academy, Cisco is also an organization with a powerful commitment to global education. Since its inception in 1997, the Cisco Networking Academy has taught more than 4 million students in 170 countries, providing them with the skills they need to meet the growing worldwide demand for information and communication technology professionals. Also established in 1997, the Cisco Foundation makes strategic grants to local, national, and global programs that use technology to provide access to education, bring economic empowerment to underserved communities, and restore vital services in the wake of natural disasters. Another example of Cisco's commitment to global education is getideas.org, a virtual meeting place where education leaders from around the world come together to share innovative ideas and best practices. At the helm of Cisco and driving its many educational initiatives is Chairman and CEO John Chambers. Mr. Chambers has received many accolades, including the U.S. State Department's top Corporate Social Responsibility Award, the Award for Corporate Excellence, which he actually received twice, the first ever Clinton Global Citizen Award, the Woodrow Wilson Award for Corporate Citizenship, and the Excellence in Corporate Philanthropy Award. For all these reasons, the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., is proud to confer upon Cisco and its chairman and CEO, John Chambers, this year's Global Education Award. Here this evening to accept the award on their behalf is Tae Yu, Cisco's Senior Vice President for Corporate Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in congratulating Cisco and John Chambers and in welcoming Tae Yu to the stage.
Thank you, Dr. Knapp, and to the World Affairs Council. John obviously, unfortunately, could not be here tonight, but he wanted me to convey his appreciation for this award. We'd also, from Cisco, would like to thank the World Affairs Council primarily for your commitment to education on world affairs. As a global corporation, we have a very deep appreciation for the impact of what that is. Now, I come from the IT sector, so obviously I want to talk about STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math. That would be an obvious point of view for me, but it's also important to all of our respective communities and countries. If you look at the last 50 years, almost 50% of the economic growth in this country came from technology-based industries. And as you move forward in the 21st century, the prediction is that 60% of the jobs have specific skill sets that currently only 20% of the workforce has. Now, I don't think that that is daunting. We like a good challenge at Cisco. We tend to be optimists. But we also believe that it takes a partnership to get that done. And to share with you a little bit of why we have this view, I want to share with you our story. We believe that public, private, and education institutions should partner together. And General Dempsey, it was a pleasure to meet both you and Mrs. Dempsey this evening. But I've said this before on many occasions, is how grateful Cisco is to the Department of Defense. Several decades ago, DARPA invested in a little thing called the Internet. They catalyzed its development, and Cisco, as well as many global corporations, exist because of that. Now, the government did its part, invested in the Internet, but then it was up to education institutions and private individuals, entrepreneurs, and the private sector in general to really do something significant with that. And we were born out of Stanford. And it was because we had this enabling environment, a government that made the key investments that are critical to our future. We had professors that really believed in driving home STEM education, although they didn't call it that at the time, and really encouraged entrepreneurialism. And that's how Cisco was born. We're a man and a wife, and by the way, Cisco was co-founded by a woman. And since this is International Women's Week, I thought it was very important to point that out. And they built this company called Cisco, and we're a global company. We have somewhere between 60,000 plus employees, but we also have a whole supply chain of partners and suppliers and customers. So one little company from one little environment could become a global company. And the beautiful thing is, we are not unique. There are many companies who respond all over the world because of that. So as we move forward, I want to share something with you. You saw the Network Academy video. And when we looked at that, I had the opportunity to go to Afghanistan in 2002. And this was right after the coalition forces had gone into Afghanistan. And with the support and partnership of State Department, UNDP, as well as the various leaders within the Kabul University, we were able to open the first Network Academy there. We had 6 women in the course. Many of them had not been in formal education. But after the first semester, the lowest score was a 94. Now, you think about this for a minute, and you say, okay, and this is the big challenge. I know educators in this room would think about that. They'd say, okay, but is it a consistent assessment? Okay, is that good for a developing country? And the reality is that this is a global assessment. So the same interactive assessments that are being taken in Afghanistan at the University of Kabul is the same assessments that are given and taken in one of the best private schools in New York City. So it doesn't matter whether someone comes from a very robust, enriched environment or a very remote rural village. The key is that you have a government that invests in infrastructure, you have the right technologies, and most important, you have the right content and passion of teachers and mentors and communities that help drive success. And this is not just for young students. There is a lot of lifelong learning. That will be the new normal. Lifelong learning, new skills, evolving jobs that don't exist today that all of us can help create. It's also a great opportunity for our military men and women who are transitioning from military careers into civilian life. There are a whole slew of opportunities here, and the goal is not just about Cisco Networking Academy. It's all the academies out there. It's all the institutions, the universities, as well as the nonprofit and NGO partners who help support this and make this a reality. So on behalf of John Chambers and over 65,000 employees at Cisco, many of who are here this evening, we want to thank you very much for this, and thank you to the World Affairs Council.
Knowledge is not power. The use of knowledge is power. Knowledge is only potential power. It's action that counts. It's results that count. Fred Thomas is my friend. I'm very proud to have him also as a professional colleague. He's a game changer in broadcast communications. He realizes the true meaning of the word connectivity. He isn't waiting for the world to come to him. He's bringing the world to America. 20 years ago, he began that journey. During the last year, I've had an opportunity to be part of that journey with him to a very special part of the world for me, Ireland. And as you can tell from my speech impediment, that's where I'm from. And I want more applause than that because General Dempsey's from Ireland too. Come on. Actually, Fred Thomas is from Ireland, and he's just discovering that even though he's got a Welshman's last name. His wife Meredith is here tonight, and behind every great person is a great spouse. And Fred and Meredith are a team. Fred's dad worked with Ed Murrow. He's got a lifetime spent in broadcast. He is a communicator par excellence. He's the man who brought Al Jazeera English to the United States at a time when it wasn't popular. He's been swimming upstream for 20 years. And now that he's coming to Ireland, he's swimming downstream and going with the flow. So it's with great pleasure, and it's a great honor, because last year's recipient of this award was Christiane Amanpour. Prior to that, Marvin Kalb, Judy Woodruff, and Eleanor Cliff. Icons in broadcasting, icons in journalism. So I would like you to give a rousing round of applause for the Global Communicator of the Year Award to my friend, Fred Thomas.
All right, so you can write a script all day long. Got it here in my pocket. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to keep this very simple. I'm hoping that the video has given you a good background on the technical, on what we've been able to do. I think Tony has done a masterful job of explaining some of the rest of it and convincing everybody that everyone is Irish. I do want to have a couple people stand, because it seems to be the right thing to do. Those are the employees of MHZ Networks. I can't see you out there. Please stand. Not a lot of us here. So these are the folks that over the course of 20 years have helped write a book that hadn't been written before. We rewrite it every day. We've used technology to change everything the way that we've done. You've seen it. We started as a little half-assed broadcast station in Washington, D.C. 20 years ago. We are now national. We are all over the country. We have sold DVDs into all 50 states. We have even sold Italian detectives back into Italy. So I think we've got a pretty good handle on inventing something that has never been done before. So I want to thank those employees for hanging in there, listening to all my stories over the years. And I think probably every employee that's ever come to MHZ has probably heard this story. So I'm going to share that story with you. So what possesses somebody to create an international channel in Washington, D.C.? Never been done, hasn't been tried. There's always a kernel of something. I'm going to say to you that education is a lifetime experience, and you never know when, you never know where. My education as a kid, public schools and all that. My real education, my father, United States Information Agency, in charge of America Illustrated. For those that don't know, that was the American propaganda publication that we sent to the Soviets. The Soviets sent us Soviet life. Okay? So you can imagine, as a 9-year-old kid, he'd sit me down, he'd put out a copy of Soviet Life, he'd put out a copy of America Illustrated, and he said, we're going to go through these. I said, okay, what are we going to do? He goes, well, I'm going to tell you the stories that are true in each one and the ones that aren't true. I said, what? So we'd go through these page by page. So I will say to you that anything I've done with MHZ Networks in the last 20 years cannot compare to going in the 5th grade in Manassas, Virginia for show and tell in 1968 with a copy of Soviet Life. After that, it's all downhill. That was the inspiration. Sitting there with him telling me about these stories that were true, these that were false, forced me to watch the evening news, have me look at all the stuff that was coming our way. And American news in the day, it's gotten better, but in the day, it was all about catastrophes, revolutions, a lot of anger, a lot of it focused at the U.S. That was our diet. So into that, I looked. He tried to present to me that there were things that were true about the world, things that weren't true about the world. Somewhere in there, I got this blinding flash of the obvious about 20 years ago. I'm going to kind of do what he did, but I'm going to do it in TV. That is the story. It's no more complicated than that. It's been a labor of love. It's been for folks like, honestly, for folks like you that have provided that support, the constant pat on the back, keep going, don't give up, keep it moving. And for that, I am more grateful for each and every one of you and everybody else in Washington, D.C. that has supported MHZ Networks over the years. And now, as Washingtonians, which all of us are tonight at least, you should take a bow yourself, because it's really been up to you that's given us, the people of MHZ, the staff of MHZ, to make this what it is. Thank you very much.
Good evening. This is a very special pleasure for me tonight. It's great to be here with all of our friends. Before asking Ambassador Aloteba to join me on the stage, I'm going to echo the sentiment expressed in the two videos with a short anecdote. The ambassador and I first met over 5 years ago in New York, and that was before a beer and before the two beautiful children. As we got to know each other over the years, I've been able to see him work and grow to be one of the finest diplomats in the UAE history. I often tell him that since he is so good at building bridges, he should have been an architect or an engineer. Fortunately, he did not follow my advice and instead focused his energy totally and his skills totally on a higher mission to serve his country. This mission has served the United Arab Emirates well, as evidenced by what you've seen and heard tonight about the dynamic young nation and its special relationship with the United States. As we mentioned, he has been able to connect. He's got this wonderful talent of connecting with business and government leaders. That's pretty easy. But with children all over the country, and with universities and schools that have been damaged or need help, he's always ready to step in and up to the plate, as we say. Now, I'd like now it's my great honor to present Ambassador Oteba with the Distinguished Diplomatic Service Award in recognition of your work and in recognition of the work of all UAE diplomats here in the United States and around the world. Please join me on the stage, Ambassador.
The danger of being introduced by not one, not two, but three extremely successful and incredibly articulate people is that there's a risk of me actually starting to believe everything that they just said about me. So I'm very grateful for those very generous and kind introductions. I think the bar has been set artificially high for me. It's my great pleasure to be here with so many friends and distinguished guests tonight. And it's a real honor to be recognized along with such personalities such as Dr. Hrabowski, Mr. Chambers, and Mr. Thomas. And on behalf of the UAE's entire diplomatic corps, I am humbled to receive the Distinguished Diplomatic Service Award. I want to start, and I want to take this opportunity to recognize two groups. First and foremost, my team at the embassy. I'm going to take the unusual liberty of speaking on behalf of my fellow honorees and say this. Anyone who leads an organization successfully, part of that success is the responsibility for lies in with their team. And I think we have one of the best teams in my embassy in the Washington, D.C. So a lot of this goes to them and their hard work. The second group I'd like to recognize are 22 young Emirati diplomats who coincidentally happen to be in Washington undergoing a training program organized by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. These young diplomats, whom I met with this afternoon, are the future of Emirati leadership. And I promise you that after meeting them this afternoon, I can assure you that the UAE is going to be in good and safe hands. Hopefully, in the not too distant future, one of them will be up here receiving this award. When I came to Washington as ambassador about 5 years ago, my country was not well understood. And although the UAE is a strong U.S. ally, committed to peace and stability in the Middle East, and a significant trading partner, few Americans know the story of my country's development, our policies, and most importantly, our deep friendship with the United States. So my team and I have worked very hard to build new relationships with both individuals and organizations, here in D.C. and around the U.S., traveling throughout the country to share that story of the deep ties that bind our two countries. And in fact, since I have came to Washington, our diplomats and I have visited nearly 20 local World Affairs councils all throughout the country, engaging hundreds of educators, business and community leaders. And the new connections that we've made through these visits are among my most rewarding achievements. These connections underscore the depth and the breadth of the UAE's relationship with the U.S., the foundation of which was historically anchored in security and military cooperation. But this relationship has expanded over the years to include robust economic, social, and cultural components in addition to the military and security. And organizations like the World Affairs Councils play an indispensable role to highlight this information. And I cannot stress enough the important work that the World Affairs Councils of Washington, D.C. does to build bridges between different cultures and to educate Americans on international affairs. So, in closing, I want to congratulate Heidi, the Board of Directors, and the entire team at the World Affairs Council for another outstanding event. And on behalf of the UAE Embassy and the entire UAE Diplomatic Corps serving all around the world, thank you very much for honoring us with the Distinguished Diplomatic Service Award.
What an honor it is tonight for the World Affairs Council to have our keynoter, General Martin E. Dempsey, the Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs of the United States of America. All of us tonight are really humbled by General Dempsey and talk about several phases of your leadership. First, to Deanie and your family, because the stories of your being a family man and the fact that you devoted 3 of your kids to the U.S. Army is tribute to part of your public servant of the United States. Total exemplary service to this nation. Last year's keynoter was someone we respect and who came here tonight to salute you, General Dempsey, and that is our Director of National Intelligence for the United States of America, James R. Clapper. James Clapper, might you stand? General Clapper. There were so many others that came to honor General Dempsey, and that includes Charlie Bolton, the Administrator of NASA. Charlie, will you stand? So it's all about leadership, and there's never been a more important time for the Joint Chiefs. But as General Dempsey is the chief advisor, the military advisor to the President of the United States, to the National Security Council, and to the Secretary of Defense. By law, he's the nation's #1 highest ranking military officer. General Dempsey? So let's note his commitment, and we don't have time to go through his career from starting out as a platoon officer all the way up through the system in every corner of the world and of this globe, nor of the awards that he's received. But let's just talk about education, because I'm proud that he went to Duke University. And what did he study? English. Now, to be the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and to do a thesis on the Irish Renaissance, we've got a lot of Irish stories here tonight. And a master's degree in military art and national security studies. But let's just take what we really are here tonight, and that's to salute global education. So what does General Dempsey say about education? His values are compelling, and that's probably why he and Duke got together on the subject of ethics. But what he says is passionate curiosity and is education's launch pad. The men and women of our armed forces possess that passionate curiosity. You can see in the way that they understand and relate to be partners and build innovative solutions to this country. It is through education. To a Renaissance man who is a singer, including Irish ballads, a Renaissance man as one of the best public servants this nation has ever known, General Martin Dempsey.
Thanks, Edie. I told Edie she's very kind. You know, Edie tried to lead, we were sitting together, and she tried to lead at least 3 standing ovations, but she stood up and nobody could see her, so it didn't turn out to be much of a standing ovation, but I can see why she was introduced as a dynamo and indefatigable, whatever that word was. I'm a little intimidated, Ambassador. Where's the Ambassador? Malbrook, congratulations. Well done. I'm a little intimidated by the fact that the ambassador from the United Arab Emirates would get up here and speak in better English than the American general with the master's degree in English from Duke University. But these things happen. I should tell you before I get to my prepared remarks, I was actually surprised tonight. They wanted me to do an interview, and surprise interviews can be a little bit dangerous, actually, on occasion. But this one was actually quite interesting because the questions had to do with education and with the World Affairs Council. And as the very last question, the interviewer said to me, "What do you make of this whole World Affairs Council?" And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, "It's outrageously aspirational." But think about that. It is outrageously aspirational that you would come together and try to build a global consensus around education. It's also quite remarkable and quite exciting. I think that what makes our country great, by the way, is that we dare to be great. And God help us if we ever forget that. And what makes... And if I can link that to what you're doing, you're daring to be great. You that try to put your weight behind education as a catalyst for progress and for a better life, not just for us who live here in the greatest democracy in the world, but for our friends and partners around the world. So well done, and I'm honored to be here with you tonight. I want to also congratulate the other honorees who we've had the pleasure of meeting and listening to tonight. I'll start with this assertion that one of the things the chairman does is, besides the fact that he quiets people during dessert, is that he also gets to make the odd assertion. Sometimes it's challenged, oftentimes it's not, but this assertion is unchallengeable, and that's that there's nothing more important in democracy than education, period. That's it. Those democracies that succeed because education provides the foundation. As the chairman, and Deanie and I reflect on this often, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, there's things that we have to do. I won't actually elaborate on those too often. But there's also things that we get to do, that we're lucky enough to get to do on behalf of our nation. And this is one of those nights for us, I'll tell you that. We're just really honored to be here and lucky enough to be able to have a chance to spend some time with you who have committed yourselves to education. Being here actually feeds and fuels my optimism about the future. And I need all the fuel I can get right now. But it reminds me of a story. Some of you have been and visited our service academies at Annapolis, at Colorado Springs, and at West Point. Or if you haven't visited them, you've probably seen them in the movies. When I actually went to the academy in 1970, tough time in our history, actually, to go to the military academy, but when I showed up at the military academy and my parents dropped me off, and I remember I was a little intimidated, but I also wasn't exactly sure what was in store for me, and so I'm not sure that I was experiencing what we in the military called that significant emotional event. But there's always an upper-class cadet there somewhere who's going to help you understand what you're actually in for, and who will eventually separate you from your parents. The particular upperclassman that I confronted was all business, very polite, very respectful, and very intimidating. But at some point, he asked us, the group of us, to say goodbye to our parents and move into another room. So I did. I said goodbye to my parents and began to move. But as I moved down the row, actually a woman that I had no idea who she was. I mean, she was the mother of one of my classmates, leaped up. She had just finished having this tearful moment with her son, and leaped up and grabbed me in a big bear hug and said, "Honey, it's going to be okay." So I was a little surprised by the affection, but I was more surprised, I think, by the fact that it had never occurred to me that it wasn't going to be okay. So I'm thinking to myself, you mean this might not be okay? So I want to tell you, the only other time I've had that experience or that emotion recently is in my recent testimony before the Congress of the United States. I'm not making that up. Look, like it is for you, education is near and dear to my heart. I have a passionate curiosity, and by the way, that's a phrase from Einstein. Einstein said, I wasn't especially smart, but I had a passionate curiosity. But I have a passionate curiosity for history and for literature in particular, but more important, for understanding the world. Alexander Graham Bell put it this way: God has strewn our paths with wonders, he said, and we certainly should not go through life with our eyes shut to them. His passion for learning and for teaching led him to discover new ways to communicate. You might be interested to know that on this day in history, in 1876, Bell was granted the patent for what he called the acoustic telegraph, which later became known as the phone, and which now some of you are using to text your children to tell them that the chairman is up here making an ass of himself. I know that. I'm okay with it, though. I know you're out there texting or tweeting. Be kind. Every chance I get, and especially when I get to talk to our younger generation, I tell them that part of being a leader is a deep dedication to lifelong learning. I actually believe that if you don't continue to learn, you're stagnant and you fall behind. In fact, Vince Lombardi, famous football coach, some of you may know the name, said, if you don't improve, you deteriorate. There's no standing still in this life, and mediocrity can't be part of your aspiration. In fact, I call myself the military's highest-ranking student when people ask me my duty description. Since I've become chairman, even way before that really, I've been on what I call a personal campaign of learning. I try to reach out to industry, to academia, to nonprofits, to anybody I can, to hear their perspectives so that our armed forces can benefit from their insights. I'd also like to think that I'm the highest-ranking teacher in the armed forces of the United States, and not just because I taught at West Point. Every day, nearly every day, I sit down with our other senior leaders and I talk about them about clarifying our future, our options, and the associated risks as we try to get from here to there. I talk to the force, and I try to explain what's happening here in Washington. That's not easily done, by the way. And I engage with the public about the amazing things that our servicemen and women do every single day. And on a personal note, I'd like to tell you that just today, our son completed his tour in Afghanistan and is now in Kyrgyzstan on his way home to reunite with his mother. Now, in fact, luckily, Deanie and I have been fortunate enough to pass on that kind of love of learning to our own children. In fact, 2 of our children went to West Point. One went to Wake Forest University and also was commissioned in ROTC. Is there a demon deacon out there? Stand up, a demon deacon. But actually, my children are far more educated and better educators than I've ever been. I should tell you, in fact, I'd like to tell you, if you have a moment, and even if you don't, about how I opened my first. I taught English at West Point, and I want to tell you about how I opened my first course when I was an instructor at West Point. I wanted to encourage you're never sure whether you're going to be a good instructor. Many of you are educators. Some of you are the captains of industry. You're never sure how that first meeting is going to go. But I wanted to set a positive tone for the semester. And so I walked into this class of 18-year-old freshman plebes at West Point, and I said, "You're the most impressive class that this institution has ever seen." Now, truthfully, they didn't buy it. I mean, they didn't buy it. And they shouldn't have bought it in retrospect, but they didn't buy it. And I hearkened back to my, the adjectives that I know from my English studies, and I thought, hyperbole, they're not going to sign up for that hyperbole. So I tried to tone it down a bit, and I said, "You're all smart, you're motivated and disciplined." And they still kind of were on edge, and I said, "Okay, look. If anybody in here thinks you're a moron, go ahead and stand up right now." So after a few seconds, I noticed nobody stood up, and I thought, okay, finally I've got them where they need to be. But just about the time I was going to launch off into my lecture, this one particular young man stood up and snapped to attention. I was absolutely stunned. I said to him, "Son, do you really consider yourself a moron?" And he said, No, sir, but I didn't want to see you standing here all by yourself." That's actually a true story. And the young man that stood up is now a one-star general in the United States Army. So let me just go on for a moment or two standing up here all by myself. Not because I want to relive that memory, but because I want you to understand how deeply I care about education and the men and women who need it to help script our future. We care because we know that education is a national strategic resource. We know that the performance of our students and their teachers has a direct impact on the prosperity of our nation. Education is what feeds the hot fusion of innovation, of trust, of commerce, and what makes our nation great. It illuminates the path to our greatness. Remember what I said at the beginning. We are great because we dare to be great, and it's education that illuminates that path that allows us to dare to be great. In a time when the acoustic telegraph has evolved into a high-powered computer that fits into your pocket or that you can wear around your wrist, education is the price of admission into an increasingly competitive global economic marketplace. But the quality of our educational institutions also has a direct impact on the security of our nations. Look, the military is a customer of our nation's education system. We're actually one of its biggest customers. Hundreds of thousands of the young men and women that follow along in today's classrooms, that matriculate through today's classrooms, move on to lead tomorrow's squads, its squadrons, and its ships. And what they learn there matters. War remains a contest of wills, and war is also discovery. Preventing wars and winning wars calls on us to outmaneuver our potential adversaries by outthinking them. There's no more Braveheart. You know the movie Braveheart. There's no more Braveheart. We don't just moon them and then attack them. That's not the way it works anymore. Our forces today understand that an international environment isn't optional, and it's not a theoretical exercise. It's actually part of their lives. We ask these young men and women to solve some of the world's most challenging, complex problems, and in its hardest places. The more they understand the history, the more they understand the culture, the more that they understand the power dynamics in play, the better and the more enduring the results that they will achieve. Now, as you recall, or as you can tell, I ascribe to the wisdom of Nelson Mandela. He said, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Of course, you want to clap, Edie?
Yes.
All right, good. The other thing about education is that it teaches us far more than we can learn in a history book or on the periodic table of the elements in chemistry. And by the way, why do we have that anymore since we can Google it now? But let me explain what I mean by that with a story about when I was a graduate student at Duke University. I studied English, but I tried to be interdisciplinary. I was a bit of a pioneer, not really, but I thought it would be cute to do that when I was a graduate student. So I decided to take some music, I decided to take some art history, and I decided to take some literature and try to knit it together. I was curious, actually, what would happen if I did that. And one of the poets I chose was William Blake. And William Blake, you might remember, was both poet and illuminist. He illuminated his manuscripts with artwork. And this professor, when I chose this particular semester-long paper, said to me, you know, this is a very complex topic you've taken here, Mr. Dempsey. You're sure you want to do this? You know, you're trying to achieve your master's, not the Nobel Peace Prize in Literature. And I said, look, I want to give this a shot. So I worked hard. I mean, I really did. I worked really hard for the entire semester. I turned it in. And at the end of the semester, I got back a C+. Now, those of you that have been to graduate school, and many of you have, know that a C+ in graduate school is like, you know, the big L stamped on your forehead that says, you know, you have not achieved, you have not tried, you are unworthy. Why are you here? You know, what is it about Duke that you didn't understand before you came here? Why did you insult me with your presence in my classroom? I mean, I was absolutely stunned. And I went to the professor and I said to him, you know, I'll say his name now because actually we've become good friends over the years. Professor Strandberg, I said, how could you give me a C? I mean, I worked as hard on that paper for 6 months than I've ever worked on anything in my entire life. And you know what he said to me? He said, let me tell you something, Mr. Dempsey. And he said, it's important that you leave your graduate education understanding this. He said, it's not how hard you work, it's the outcome you produce. And I thought, uh-oh. And he's right. It isn't just about the effort. It's got to, at some point, if you put your education to use, you've got to produce outcomes. You know, during nearly a dozen years of war, the ingenuity, the imagination, and the intellect of the young men and women who wear this uniform that I'm so proud to use on the front lines around the world have done just that. They've delivered outcomes. In Iraq and Afghanistan, we gave them tremendous responsibilities, pushing capability, responsibility, and even authority to the very edge of the battlefield, to the lowest levels of command. Today, a 22-year-old second lieutenant can have more responsibility than I had as a two-star general in 2003 in Baghdad when I commanded the 1st Armored Division. Here's the point. In the coming years, our force, the United States military force, will transition from constant campaigning and will have to be ready for unknown contingencies. We can talk all we want about what we want to do in the future, but others get a vote. And when the others get a vote, we've got to be ready no matter how complex and how uncertain and how surprising it is. And as these soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardsmen return home from these incredible missions that they have accomplished, and as thousands others like them transition out of the military and stay in the military, we have to keep challenging them. We need to leverage this incredible resource to drive their energy and their curiosity into productive pursuits that benefit the entire nation. We're staring at a moment of national opportunity, and we can't afford to look away. What you're teaching in these international relations courses around the country, they've actually lived it. What you're learning or making your graduate students learn in the graduate lab, they've actually used it. What you're hearing from the experts, they've actually experienced it. Or, as author Clarence Day put it, information's pretty thin stuff unless you mix it with experience. The impact that this generation of leaders who are coming back from 12 years of war will have, this pool of experience can actually have such an impact on our nation's education system that it can be profound, and I hope we don't miss the opportunity. In a time when industry, and I'm speaking this way because I know I have industry leaders here, in a time when industry is competing for talent, we really ought to find new ways to get our veterans involved in the classroom as well. Not just as students, by the way, but also taking advantage of the GI Bill, who are taking advantage of the GI Bill, but also as teachers, guest lecturers, mentors, and advisors, sharing their knowledge and continuing to contribute to our national security even after they're out of uniform. Programs, by the way, like Troops to Teachers and DoD Starbase are a start, but we can do more. And I'm optimistic that we can and we will. I'm optimistic because of the leaders that I have met here tonight and those who will follow in your footsteps. I'm optimistic because of the men and women of our armed forces and their dedication to meeting and matching the challenges they face every day. I'm optimistic because through these challenging times, here I am in a room full of people that are passionate about making a difference. And as I said, you know, some of you know the that famous beer commercial. I'm not supposed to mention names, but in this particular Mexican beer commercial, the guy with the beard, the most interesting man in the world, other than the ambassador, tells everybody to stay thirsty, my friends. Here's my advice to all of us here tonight. As we confront a really uncertain future in a very, very complex world, stay curious, my friends. Thank you very much.
I'm absolutely honored to be receiving this award from the World Affairs Council, but I'm accepting it on behalf of my colleagues and students. It seems to me that the significance of the award really is that faculty and students at UMBC are very involved in global education and research. And so it is a community of scholars, quite frankly, focused on international affairs in many ways. I think one of the most important points about the World Affairs Council and what they do is that they are encouraging people in this country and beyond to get to know one another, to focus on substantive interaction, and to reflect on the significance of global matters, whether it's about education or activities for people to get to know each other. I think it's critical to the future of humankind. I think, particularly talking about American students, we need to emphasize the importance of studying another language, of getting a chance to go overseas, to understanding more about the culture, the values of people in other places, and most important, even if the student can't go overseas, to learn how to use technology to learn about other people. The significance of education is we're willing to take risks and to consider possibilities that before were not even possible. I think if you were to talk about one of the greatest challenges we face in the world, it is that people don't understand each other's perspectives, that we have not studied carefully the different backgrounds and points of view and religions and values of other people to determine how best we can connect in such a way that we don't have to fight each other. The real question for our country is such an amazingly strong and rich place in so many ways is to use our resources and our brain power to teach our own children a lot about our responsibility as one of the greatest countries ever, quite frankly, and to appreciate what it means to be human.
The award means a lot to me. I was born in Washington, D.C. I've lived here most of my life. So to get an award from a Washington-based organization means quite a bit to me. I think the biggest challenge is getting people to listen to one another rather than yell at each other. That's true both in the U.S., but increasingly around the world. Finding ways to be able to truly listen, to truly understand, has always been a challenge. And even though we have electronic gadgets that supposedly let us do it easier, there still has to be a one-on-one with people.
Well, I feel very honored to have been selected to receive the Distinguished Diplomatic Service Award by the World Affairs Council. It's a humbling compliment, but also I have to question their judgment because I look at my fellow honorees and I don't feel I belong in the same category. The programs that the World Affairs Council provides, both here in Washington and around the country, are indispensable for a diplomat, especially a diplomat who's who's exerting a lot of effort to try to explain to the United States our country, our policies, our views, that we are a strong and reliable ally. And there simply is enough time or staff on my team to be able to do that on their own. So we rely on World Affairs Councils throughout the country to be a host and a venue for us to send these messages. And I have not seen a better organization at bringing people together and allowing us to deliver our message and engage with Americans beyond the Beltway about how important the UAE is to the United States and vice versa. The advice I would give to young people today is to take advantage of the resources and tools that are available at their disposal that weren't available to us 10 or 20 years ago. Whether it's the internet, social media, smartphones, Google, the abundance of technology, information, communication capabilities is something that I think young people today should take advantage of and use to the best of their abilities. We didn't have that 10 years ago, and I would encourage them to make the most out of it. The biggest challenge I think we face today is not understanding each other's viewpoints, not understanding different cultures we come from. I find that one of the things I am obligated to do in my job is to help bridge understanding, is help bring the two cultures closer together, is to explain to Americans what we are thinking and explain to my fellow people at home what the Americans are thinking. So it really is about bringing each other closer, and things like the World Affairs Councils and technology and media help us all to understand each other better.
Well, I'm honored, obviously, and especially so because of my continuing commitment to education. And this is a celebration of people who understand that education is actually the foundation of democracy. It's also, as a military leader, it's the foundation of building adaptable leaders who are able to be placed in unfamiliar, uncertain, and complex environments and make sense of them and help promote our interests worldwide. So this is a terrific venue. If as a premise, if as a foundational, a first principle, you decide that education is an imperative in our democracy, then events like this and organizations like this who commit themselves and who reach out in public-private partnerships to advance education, then I think the answer to your question becomes clear, which is to say, nobody can do it by themselves. The government can't do it by themselves. The private sector can't do it by themselves. This is truly one of those places where we need a partnership. I actually am asked about giving advice to young men and women, follow-on generations, on why education matters. And I believe that I am, in the United States military, I'm the chief educator and the commander of learning, because the environment in which we find ourselves is so complex. And I've been in a kind of a running debate about whether it's more or less dangerous than it has been for previous generations. And it doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong about that. What matters is that we engage in an educated conversation about what's best for the country, both domestically and internationally, and that we have the courage to allow our beliefs to be challenged. And isn't that the definition of education? I love the name. I love the name, the World Affairs Council. It's outrageously aspirational in a very positive way.